Now let's try to understand what exactly is Ajax and what is XML HTTP request. Although the name looks a little bit weird, they are really simple and really important terms in web development. Ajax allows us to send asynchronous request back to the server or back to the database and get our data back in XML or JSON or text format. So what is mean by asynchronous? Basically, in layman's term, you can think about it such as getting the data or posting the data without actually refreshing the page. That means you should be able to get the data back from database without refreshing the complete page. And why it is important? Of course, because of speed and because of user experience. So imagine that every time you are on Facebook, and if you go into any post, if you click on any photo, you will see that immediately new data loads up without refreshing the page. That is because of XML or Ajax request. Of course, Facebook uses a much complex uh, algorithm to do this, but we will just scratch the surface with understanding Ajax and XML HTTP request. So basically, Ajax is used to send and receive the data back from a database or from servers. So you as a client, so when we say client, we mean the front end. So when we create an input form or anything like that, when we submit, we as a client creates a Ajax request, which then creates a XML HTTP request which goes to the server. If you are saving the data, it will save it, or if you are requesting a data, it will get the data back for you. Now we will have a look at basic XML HTTP request, what is XML HTTP request object and how to use it. Basically, this is provided to you by browser's JavaScript environment. So this is an API in the form of an object. This allows us to transfer the data back from client to the server and things like that. Even though we have XML in the object name, it also deals with JSON as well as plain text data. Now I will go back to my code and I will simply add a XML object which we can see in console log. So var xhr is equal to new XML HTTP request. Alright, if I save this, checking XML HTTP object. Now if I save this and if I go back to my web page and if I go inside console and search for XHR, you will see that it will return us HTTP XML HTTP request object having multiple keys. So these are the functions that we can work with. Most of the time we will be working with onload, and people are nowadays not using on ready state change that much because onload simplifies the process, but we will have a look at both of them and how to use them. Apart from that, status is also important because this allows us to understand how exactly things are moving. Now let's try to create a basic request where we will load this sample.txt file which I have here into our console log. Now if I want to load this file, I can simply create xhr.open. So basically open is a method which allows us to read external files, it can be text or XML or JSON, into our application. Open method takes three parameters. So open method takes parameters such as type. So type is get, so it can either be get or post. So when we say get, that means we are looking to get the data from somewhere, and when we say post, that means we are looking to send the data somewhere. Then either we can provide a file name or the URL, and finally we will pass, do we need this task to be async or not. So it can be either true or false. All right, Now we will create this request. So we want to get this sample.txt file, and notice that I am directly writing sample.txt because my index.js and my sample.txt are in the same folder. If I had this sample.txt in some another folder, I would have given that path. And finally, I need my request to be async. That is why I will write true. So this is how I will create a request. Notice that we have just created the request. We haven't sent the request yet, or also we haven't even told the program what to do when you get this file. Now we will use xhr.onload to understand the procedure that we want to follow when we get the file. So when we load the file completely, we want to execute a function, and this function, if this dot state or this dot status is equal to 200, then we want to do something. All right, now what we did here, basically, since I am already inside xhr, I can neglect writing xhr like this, and I can just write this. So this is a keyword which refer to the xhr here, and 200 is the status code. So basically there is a definite status code defined which represent some sort of status. So just to give you a brief summary, http statuses are like this. So when we say 200, that means okay, we got the result back. So got the result successfully. If we get the status as 403, that means request is forbidden. So there must be some error with the security and things like that. And if we get the request as 404, that means requested file or URL not found. So you might have seen this 404 error in previous, right? Because if you go to some web page which is not available, that will throw you an error of 404. So these are in general three statuses that we use to pinpoint different scenarios when we either pass the get request or post request or anything like that. So okay, now if I do the onload and if I get the status as 200, that means my query is successful. Then I can console.log the this dot response text. That means whatever text that I got back from this condition, or what we can say from this request, will be received here, and then I can console log. Now we have defined the uh, we have defined the uh, what we can say we have defined the onload function. That means what to do when we got the data, and finally we will do the send request. So basically now we just need to send the request, that okay, I have everything defined, now send my request and check what do we get. All right, now if I save this and if I go back, you can see I am inside a debugger. Okay, that's okay, and I'll just refresh this to get the latest code, and I will remove all these debuggers. I will just keep it here, and if I click OK, you will see that I got the this dot status as 200. That means it found my file successfully, and that is why I will be able to go inside this code and look for this dot response text. So as you can see, we got the console log text. Alright, now if I want to add this text into my front end, I can easily do that too. So if I create a new p tag, let's say with the ID of response text, I can then simply write, if you remember our DOM lecture correctly, I can simply write document dot get element by ID rest text dot inner text is equal to this dot response text, all right, now if I save this and if I go back, if I refresh, There we go. We got the text back. So you can see that now this is working perfectly fine. But what is the thing that makes it unique? So this is this. Now if I add one more button here, let's say if I add a button here with on click get text and get text, and now if I wrap this complete XHR code inside a function, so if I write it inside a function, and now if I try to execute this code with no debuggers, so you can see now when I click on get text, I am able to fetch this data without refreshing my page, and that is really powerful. We are able to get the data, and similarly we will be able to post the data as well without changing the or without refreshing the page. So that is why it is really important. Just like XHR on load, as I said, we also have XHR on ready state. So XHR, okay, yeah, of course. Now this will live inside this function only, right? So we cannot access this variable outside this function, right? But if I define this variable here and if I do it like this, of course, when I will execute my function for the first time, then I will have all the value inside XHR. Now on ready state change, this is also really important. This gives us an idea about how exactly on ready state change works. Now let's try to have a look at what exactly we will get when we try to do the same thing, but instead of using the on load, we use the on ready state change. In on ready state change, just like we had these different statuses, there are different state, uh, what we can say states which define certain action. So what do we mean by that? Let's say ready state values. So basically if the value is 0, that means request is not initialized. So if it is 0, request is not initialized. If it is 1, that means server connection established. If it is 2, that means the server has received the request. So received request. If it is 3, that means the processing the request. And finally 4 means the request is completed and now the response is ready. So if I want to use this xhr dot on ready state, I can just simply comment this for now, or maybe I will copy this completely here with another button, let's say on ready. This will give you an idea about what exactly we will be doing when we use the on ready. I will add one more button and I will add this as a function name here. Alright, now what will happen is instead of using on load, we will be using on ready. So xhr dot on ready state change is equal to function, and inside this, now earlier we were just taking the status, but here we need to check also the state. So if this dot ready state is equal to 4 and this dot status is equal to 200. So if both of these conditions are matched, then and then only we can receive the text back. So console.log this dot response text. Response text. All right, now I will simply delete this because we are not doing onload here. Alright, if I save this, if I go back, I will remove these debuggers from here, and if I look into the console and if I click on get ready, now you can see that okay, awesome, we are getting the text back. So this tells us that how exactly this query is working. If I save this, if I go back again, and I will just simply comment this. If I refresh, if I click here, you can see now we are getting the data in console log. So what exactly is different here and how we can leverage this? If I console.log, if I console.log xhr state, that means the state which it has before actually sending the request. So before sending request, I can check it with xhr.ready state. And also now inside the onReady state change, I can console.log state now and this dot ready state. Alright, if I save this and if I go back, if I click on this, okay, I must have, okay, now if I refresh, you can see before sending the request, the response or the state was 1, and then we loop through all the states available, and finally when the state was 4, we got this response. So here you can pinpoint all the different states so that you can show your client, you can basically show your client some sort of response according to that. So that means if the state is 1, you can then say okay, connection established. Then when the state will be 2, you can then show the alert or message that we have received the request and things like that. So basically when we use onReady state, we can pinpoint to exact different states available. But when we use onload, there is there is directly state 4 which we get back, because we are not dealing with each state. All right, so this is main difference between the onReady state change and the onload function. So this was about XML HTTP request get. Now in order to use the XML HTTP request post, we will need to use PHP, and thus we will also need to use a server such as XAMPP. Before getting into that, let's have a look at using a JSON data. So I also have one another file here known as sample JSON, which basically has some information about some users. Now if I go back to my application and if I simply copy this, or better if I just simply copy this one more time. Alright, if I copy this, paste it here and uncomment this while commenting this. Alright, now what I can do is, I can simply pass my sample.json file, and of course if I look for the response.txt, I will receive the JSON in a string format. So okay, if I click here, you can see that the data is in a string format. So I can easily change the data from string format to json.parse, which will then fetch me a proper JSON, right? And then if I try to console.log it, if I go again, if I click on get text, remove these debuggers, awesome, I get my data back is a JSON format. Most of the APIs that we work with either send you the data in a JSON format or in XML format. Hence it is really important for us to understand and to get familiar with JSON. So basically this JSON has returned me an object which again has 3 objects inside them. So what can we do here? I can write object.keys and then I can pass this JSON here, right? So first of all, let me save this JSON somewhere. So var user JSON, and let's say if I, instead of console logging, if I save it like this, var user JSON, And now if I run this get text and then check for user JSON, awesome, I have it. And now if I search for the object.keys user JSON, I got all the keys back, and then I can run a for loop, right? So I can do something like this. So now what I can do is, let me try to add all these three users as a list in our application. So how can we do that? Now what we will do is, we will simply add a div here. So div with the ID of users. Alright, and inside that now we want to loop through it. So how can we do that? First of all, we need to create the array of all the keys. So var keys is equal to this, and then for I equals to 0, I less than keys dot length I plus plus, we can then add that JSON data back to our application. So how can we do that? We can simply add div, we can also define one more thing here, var div data or div user is equal to document dot get element by ID, and then I can pass this users here, and then div users dot inner HTML plus equals to, because I want to add more things to it. So what I'm planning to do is, I'm planning to add a li tag. So for that I will, of course I will need to add a ul tag. So maybe I can change this div with a ul. It's much better now, and then I can just keep on adding li tags. So how can we do that? Li, and then inside this I will write user JSON, then that key. So user JSON, then keys I, right? Because the first key, and then that key from user JSON will return me the email and username. So I can write email here, plus I will close this li, and maybe I can write email is equal to this, and then I will add the same thing again. Now this time we will add username and username here. Awesome. Now let's see if it works. Now if I go back, get text, awesome, we have email Rachel Green, username Gucci Rachel, email Ross Geller, username Dino Ross, email Chandler Bing, username Haha Chandler. So this is how we can play with the data that we get back from the JSON request in order to use the data in the front end. We will need to play with this, and we will need to make sure that we are able to do this in a proper way when we are getting the geospatial data back from Postgres. So if you remember, we had the all cities and all countries data in our database, which if we want to directly use in our application without GeoServer, we will need to fetch that data, right? We will need to fetch the data from Postgres directly to the JavaScript, and then we will need to create all these little features that we can use with our application. Now in next video, let's try to see how can we do that.